In the last chapter, when we were exploring the labor supply curve, we decomposed the effect of a wage change on the hours worked into income and substitution effects to see how workers respond. In this chapter, we can do the same for firms and their decision to hire. So think of it this way. The wage cut will reduce the price of labor relative to capital, making it so that hiring an additional employee is relatively less costly than before. So now instead of paying $40 an hour, say you're paying $38 an hour. This really adds up over time. So the firm will be willing to hire more workers and rely less on capital. So now their production will be less labor intensive. Excuse me, it will be more labor intensive because they will have more workers relative to their capital. However, there's another effect present at the same time. This reduction in wages, remember, it reduces the marginal cost of production too. So firms can increase production more cheaply. Remember, they produce where marginal cost equals the marginal benefits. So if the marginal cost goes down, they need less in the way of prices to maximize their profit. They can charge less for those same goods and still increase their production to maximize their profits. So as they increase production, they'll need additional workers. So both of these combine to affect the firm's decision-making process. In this case, both encourage a firm to expand, and we can see that in the graph right here. So in this figure, initially our firm is at point P, which is their profit maximizing point. The line W0 right here is their initial wage rate, or the hourly wage initially. And their isocost curve shows that they'll be producing 100 units of output. So this curve right here, that's tangent to the isocost line, signifies 100 units being produced. At this point, they'll employ 25 workers. So what happens when the firm reduces wages from W0 to W1? The substitution effect can be seen from the move from point P to point R. So going from here to here, now that the firm is paying a lower wage, it means the slope of the wage curve will be shallower. And the firm can move out to a farther isoquant curve, which in this case, this line right here, which represents output of 150 units. And that says the firm will hire 50 workers. But now, why do we have this odd line DD right here? Note this is parallel to the original wage rate. It represents the same wage rate that we saw initially, just shifted out to the right. This is representing the scale effect for the firm. So it shows the effect of increasing production because it's now relatively cheaper. In practice, a firm would move to the new production and worker level in two moves. First, they move from point P to point Q. So they increase their employment, in this case, from 25 workers to 40 workers, and they increase how much capital they would use. But they move along that isoquant curve, that the 150 units of production, down to this new wage rate line. So what's important to note here is that while the effect on workers is clear, in this case, decrease in wage rate is going to increase the number of workers, the effect on capital is ambiguous, depending on whether the scale effect or the substitution effect is larger. So if the scale effect is larger, which is depicted in this picture here, the expansion will result in more capital and more workers. So looking at point P, again, 25 workers moving out to point R, 50 workers. But also note on the y-axis, which is the amount of capital being used, moving from point P to point R, we end up with more capital being used in production too. Again, because the scale effect dominates, in this case, the scale effect is larger, firms can produce more, they're going to need more capital as well in the long run. However, the opposite can also be true. If the substitution effect is larger, then the capital that the firm uses will fall while the number of workers rise. So instead of moving from point P to point R up here, maybe point R would be somewhere down here in that case. So there ends up being less capital originally.